Please, you'll only make it worse. There's so much fear. You're not safe here.
This fortnight on the other side, the Greens just keep getting weirder and weirder. That was the federal MP for Ryan in Brisbane. But 1 in 8 Aussies still think the Greens are worth voting for. Have we lost our minds? And has the Liberal Party already lost the momentum in this election campaign? We'll discuss the real prospect of a Labor Green Teals coalition government. A former family court judge says the quiet part out loud. Yes, the court has been influenced by feminist ideology, and yes, it has been to the detriment of many men. An amazing interview. And why the left's nonsense about the causes of the housing crisis are just plain wrong. We'll tear a recent Friendly Jordies video to bits. This is a big show, and I promise it's a Snow White free zone. G'day Sydney, g'day Thargomindah. Our thoughts and prayers are with everybody affected by the floods around Australia at the moment. This is episode 406 of The Other Side for the fortnight commencing Friday, April 4, 2025. I'm Damien Curry. The Other Side is your analysis of the best news and commentary without the woke. Our bias, we always declare it right up front, is sensible centre right. What we would call good old-fashioned, everyday, common sense Aussie values. And we certainly don't expect you to agree with everything we say. We want to just bring you different perspectives for your consideration through a classical liberal, conservative and libertarian lens, unlike the left-wing lens that's dominant in our Aussie media today. And most importantly, we pay our own way with your voluntary support via our website, othersidetv.com.au. Please get on there and support us if you like what we do. We really do need your support. A quick important announcement. Our show is now fortnightly, but there will be a show next Friday night, April 11, because there won't be a show the following Friday, April 18, because it's Good Friday and the Easter holiday long weekend. Let's get into it. All right, just a quick note about Donald Trump's tariffs, first of all. This is a show for classical liberals, libertarians and conservatives, and tariffs are, by their very nature, anti-liberal economics. So they're not a tool that classical liberals like to see used that often. However, the fear-mongering and the panic in the Aussie media about these tariffs, I mean, it's like the world's caving in, the stock markets are crashing. It reflects, I think, a pretty poor understanding of economics among our journalistic class. Tariffs are not in and of themselves bad if they're applied for the right reasons. The simple orange man bad reactions on social media and Trump is dumb stuff is quite tedious and boring, and it just doesn't wash. Trump has been thinking about the fairness of trade on Americans and American taxpayers and thinking about tariffs since he was a young man.
And yet we let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They don't have laws against it. They just make it impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. And hey, I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. I mean, you can respect somebody that's beating the hell out of you, but they are beating the hell out of this country. Kuwait, they live like kings. The poorest person in Kuwait, they live like kings. And yet they're not paying. We make it possible for them to sell their oil. Why aren't they paying us 25% of what they're making? It's a joke.
Now, Trump's current trade policy reflects a mix of political strategy, national security strategy, economic nationalism, and a deal-making approach and mindset that we all should know about, be quite familiar with by now. This is his mode of operation, his modus operandi. It's not a conventional textbook economic approach. If people want to criticize it on social media, fine, go right ahead. I just wish they'd consider all the factors and debate sensibly. Tariffs are not always a bad idea. They're a tax levied by government. And yes, most of that tax is paid at home by the end customer country. But it does put price pressure on the seller of the goods too. So the foreign side will end up paying a little bit of that tax. Now, Trump has got to raise revenue somehow. He wants to bring income taxes down. He wants to get the debt down and he wants to stimulate the economy. So the first step is to get the cost of government down, stop the waste, right? So you have Doge, you get Elon Musk in to clean up all the waste in government. Step two, change the taxation system to shift the burden from the people to where you want it to go. And use tax to incentivize things that you want, like local production and security and national sovereignty. Now, there will be an economic efficiency cost, of course. Okay, free trade's always better and more efficient. But sometimes there are other things more important than efficiency. American author and former Democrat, I repeat, former Democrat, and self-described MAGA lefty, Bacha Unga Sargon is her name. She put the case for tariffs very clearly on Piers Morgan's show late this week.
What I find so frustrating about the conversation around tariffs is that we all agree on the problem. We all agree that the deindustrialization of America led to the downward mobility of the American working class, deaths of despair, people working multiple jobs and not being able to afford the American dream. We all agree that it is deeply unfair for the American middle class to be bearing the burden of unfair tariffs from other countries. We all agree that it is great for the president to have leverage in order to demand reasonable things, like that countries stop allowing fentanyl to murder 100,000 Americans every year, and that Mexico do its part to police its own border. And yet when somebody has the courage to show up and say to Wall Street, screw you, I am waging war. I am waging class warfare on behalf of the American working class. And you elites in Wall Street, you do what you need to do because I'm not going to stop fighting for the American working class. Suddenly, everybody is sitting around going, oh no, the stock market. Yeah, the stock market looks like that because the rich are punishing Trump for siding with the neglected and humiliated American working class over them. We have already seen these tariffs work, Pierce. The number of people crossing the southern border is at zero. Fentanyl is at record lows for the last 10 years. We have already seen $1.2 trillion in manufacturing invested in this country since January 21st. So they have already worked. Now, how long is Wall Street going to keep trying to punish this president for standing the American working class? I don't know, but I can tell you that the view from the street is people cannot believe that there is a president who is working for them, who is putting them first and telling Wall Street to go screw itself. Wall Street, which picked the Democrats for the last 3 election cycles in a row. That's what the real story is here.
That was American author and former Democrat Bacha Unga Sargon on the Piers Morgan show this week. The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside. Well, hasn't election season just been an absolute hoot so far? So much vision for our country, such foresight, such strong, powerful, inspiring and exciting ideas from our great leaders and our major parties. And as a result, the Australian people have shown they don't give a rat's. The first news poll of the campaign came out in the Australian newspaper Sunday night, and it was a big kick in the pants for Peter Dutton. Here's how Sky News reported it Monday.
Labor has secured an early lead in the election race, overtaking the coalition in two-party preferred terms. That's according to the latest news poll in the Australian today. Labor's primary vote has grown 1 point to 33%. That's its best figure this year and consistent with the party's result in the last election. The coalition's primary vote has dropped 2 points to 37%. Support for the Greens remains steady at 12. One Nation has fallen to 6, while support for other minor parties and independents grew 2 points to 12.
Sky News reporting on the Australian news poll on Monday. So that's pretty dismal numbers. Labor on 33 and the coalition, that's two political parties, remember, the Liberal Party and the National Parties combined, on just 37% of the vote. That means more than 1/3 of Australians have no confidence whatsoever in our two major parties, Labor and Liberal. It's a pretty sad state of affairs. One Nation is on 6%, and other independents and minor parties are up to 12%. Now, look, this isn't what I'm going to say now, not a popular view among viewers of this show probably, but I got to say it, guys. The Conservative minor parties just aren't delivering the goods. One Nation and the Libertarians and whatever Clive Palmer's party is being called this time around, they all have one critical flaw. They offer no alternative government with depth. One Nation has had decades to put together a team that's deeper than Pauline Hanson and a couple of other people who happen to be in her good books at the moment. Pauline has failed to deliver depth and failed to expand her brand beyond herself and build a real team that's lasting and can demonstrate that it could actually govern. And I like Pauline, right? So, and a lot of what she's done. So I say that with no joy. The Libertarian Party, again, I like them. I ran for the Libertarian Party in the last election as the Liberal Democrats. The New South Wales branch, they're all divided. They've got tensions with Queensland and Victoria. It hasn't produced a leadership team that's got structure and depth of experience either, despite having some strong candidates like Jordan Ditloff in Victoria. And Clive Palmer is again going to throw tens of millions of dollars at badly produced and executed marketing campaigns and ads, ignoring the expertise of people in the field who could get 20 times the value and result with 1/20th of the money. So now that I've lost all of my friends on the right, it is a sad and sorry state of affairs. And please know that it gives me absolutely no pleasure saying it. But I think we've got to call it out like this, and we've got to talk about it on this show. And after 3 more years, we are in the same position that we were back in 2022. This leaves non-left-wing Australians, the Conservatives, the classical Liberals and the Libertarians, with only one hope: a Liberal national coalition government with either a slim majority or a minority propped up maybe by One Nation. I'm praying that they will get over the line, but the coalition is really taking a big risk by doing what they think is a playing it safe strategy. But here's the rub. Let's take a look at the state of play on the left. If we could put that Sky News graphic just up again for a second, please, John. You can see the news poll has the Greens at 12%. 12% still. This is truly astounding. After the abysmal performances and behaviour of so many of the elected members of this extreme and radically left-wing party over the past 3 years, 1 in 8 Australian voters still want to put them first on their ballot. They've got 3 seats in Brisbane and 1 in Melbourne, and they could pick up even more. One of their Brisbane MPs is Green Boomer architect Elizabeth Watson-Brown, who won the seat off the Liberals in 2022, the seat of Ryan. Here's her response to last week's federal budget.
There's so much fear. You're not safe here.
Authorised by Jay McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.
What in God's name was that? Her anxiety at the fossil fuel spending in the federal budget. Do the Greens understand that poor people will die if we don't have fossil fuels? Do they not get that a transition has to be a transition, not a turn off the lights and be damned exercise? They truly are bonkers, but not as bonkers as the 12% of Aussies who still want to vote for them after seeing stuff like that. I really do wonder somehow if the culture can be saved in this country. The Liberals have a very strong and hard-working, down-to-earth candidate in that electorate of Ryan in Brisbane this time around, a woman by the name of Maggie Forrest. Let's hope the good burgers of Ryan show some common sense this time around. A rumour has it they probably will. Elizabeth Watson-Brown isn't exactly impressing the electorate. And She didn't want to answer the very sensible questions of high-profile conservative young political campaigner Barclay McGain at what was supposed to be a community forum at an Anglican church in the electorate this week. In fact, the priest decided that she would just ask Barclay to leave.
It's a cost of living election, Elizabeth, and you don't want to answer questions about how your policies are going to make it really hard for me to own a home. You already own 3 homes, Elizabeth. I had one more question regarding the power of renewables. The cost of renewables, it's the number one issue of this election, cost of living. The number one issue we discussed was cost of living, and it didn't even get brought up. Elizabeth Watson-Brown said that housing is a human right. She owns 3 houses. 2 of them are investment properties. Yeah.
Both we are just delayed with the.
So she won't answer the question?
No, we have to stick to.
Is it impossible to answer, Elizabeth? I mean, you've got a few minutes to answer here. It's a cost of living election, Elizabeth, and you don't want to answer questions about how your policies are going to make it really hard for me to own a home. You already own 3 homes, Elizabeth. She says that housing is human right. I don't have one.
How are we going to get you to believe it?
Well, because I want to ask a question of Elizabeth. Her office won't answer my questions.
Right, so you can do that at her office.
Right, her office won't answer my questions, so just go to her office. Green logic, I think that's called. 25-year-old Barclay McGain asking the questions there of the Brisbane Greens candidate for the electorate of Ryan, Elizabeth Watson-Brown. And thanks to Chris Coveries for that video. Lots of people moving in there to protect Elizabeth from Barclay's terrible questions. Watson-Brown also refuses to fly the Australian flag in her office. The other flags get flown, of course. As former Army sniper Ryan Shaw put it, the Australian national flag was the symbol that we draped over the coffin of our friends killed in Afghanistan. Yet it seems a meaningless symbol to her. That really makes my blood boil. The utter disrespect for the men who sacrificed their lives for her freedom so she can dance like a clown on TikTok. And she can't even honour our flag. Brisbane has 3 Greens in Parliament because it didn't have the Teals in 2022, and it still doesn't, thankfully. But in other capitals, of course, the Teals are prominent in the inner cities. The mostly wealthy independent candidates, supported to the tune of an average of roughly $700,000 each, according to The Australian, by the Climate 200 fundraising body of Simon Holmes à Court. Simon also spoke at a Brisbane community event recently, and he also was asked a couple of questions by our mate Barclay McGain.
There's no kind of discussion about how these renewables will lower power bills. I mean, we were promised by Albanese it would cost it would lower our power bill by $240. It's gone up. We're around here tonight at a luxury cinema with our champagne flutes. I'm interested to hear from Simon Holmes à Court.
Simon, I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that.
I don't think it's actually. I don't think it's actually.
I think people need to know. They need to know. I think it'd be good if you answer for people to know so we can know. Everyone here is here with their champagne flutes in a luxury cinema. You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't understand it at all. But he's all about transparency in government. Don't be a dick. You're very out of touch, Simon Holmes à Court.
Simon Holmes à Court's response to Barclay's normal, sensible question was, don't be a dick. It's funny how these left-wing Green types never want to answer any questions that are challenging or hard or have any depth. Barclay wasn't being rude. He waited until question time in both those cases. They were community forums, and he asked sensible questions. Anyway, our fellow Aussies want to keep voting for these people, so what can you do? Now, going back to the news poll for a second, the Teals are mixed in with the other group there in grey, but I'd bet that the 2% rise that you see there is at least half theirs. And it's the preferences from the Greens that will probably carry Anthony Albanese over the line. 12 plus 37 is 49. Add a couple of percentage points for those others, and I'd say the 2-party preferred guess, which the Australian News Poll has it at 51-49 in Labor's favour. Well, I'd say it's probably more like 53-47 or 52-48 to Labor. Again, I hope not. I sure don't feel like this news poll is on the money. It doesn't feel like it to me. But these days, remember, we don't share media like the olden days. We all have our own little media bubbles online and friend circles that are more politically polarised than they used to be. And I reckon the feels might not be that reliable anymore. The polls could be right. If I had to put money on it today, I'd say we're heading for a Labor, Teal, Green, minority Albanese government. But Dutz was putting on a brave face in an exclusive interview with Sky News' Andrew Clennell on Wednesday.
How are you feeling this close to an election when you're behind in the news poll?
Look, I feel pretty relaxed about where we're at. I think we've done a lot of work in policy. We've done a lot of work in understanding what Australians are going through, and I think we can frame ourselves as a better alternative over the next 3 years than what people have experienced over this 3 years.
But shouldn't you be ahead now? I mean, it's hard for a Prime Minister to have a defeat like The Voice and for everyone's living standards to decline so much, albeit there's low unemployment. One would think you would be ahead. Maybe not by a great margin, but you're not.
Well, it hasn't happened since 1931 that a first-term government has lost, and that's not for any insignificant reason. The fact is that people normally pick and stick, and I think they would normally give the benefit of the doubt to a government like this. But I do think there's an incredible softness in the numbers, and I do think as we move around the country, it's obvious that people are still worried about the cost of living pressures that they're under, small business failures, they're worried about the cost of energy, they're worried about what a Labor Greens minority government would mean for them and their families, and indeed for our country. I think the Prime Minister's dropped the ball in relation to national security, and there are other factors that I think will come into play as we get closer to the election. And I think on that basis, we can be in a good position to win.
Peter Dutton speaking with Sky News' Andrew Clennell on Wednesday. I do hope he's right. He's got to put a brave face out there, and I hope he says he's calm and there's nothing to worry about, but I hope behind the scenes he's not calm and he is very worried, because he's all we've got to save us from the complete train wreck for our country that would be a Labor, Teal, Green coalition government. Just a reminder that, yes, our main show is now fortnightly, but there will be a show next Friday night, April 11, because there won't be a show the following Friday, April 18, because it's Good Friday and the Easter holiday weekend. Remember too that our new show, The Other Side Unplugged, drops often on the Friday nights that we don't have a main show, but can drop anytime. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and the little bell on YouTube so you never miss a thing. And even better still, sign up on our website at othersidetv.com.au and we'll send you emails when we post stuff if you want. Okay, this next story is a biggie. In an extraordinarily candid interview, a former Australian family court judge has spoken openly about the influence of feminist ideology and indirect political pressure on the court. This interview was conducted and posted this week online by respected men's rights campaigner, friend of the other side, and journalist Bettina Arndt. While highly respectful of the court and the judges who work in it, Adelaide barrister and former family court judge Stuart Lindsay told Bettina that our country's family court system is in enormous trouble. He says the problem isn't on the bench as much as in the Family Law Act, the laws themselves that the judges are required to follow.
The court is a hated institution in many people's view, having a real bias against men. Do you think that's fair?
Look, there are very good people in the court, very good judges sitting in the court doing a conscientious job, and not only judges, but there are family consultants and people writing reports who are doing a fine job and doing it conscientiously and trying to do their best for both the litigants and especially the children in parenting cases. But it's fundamental matters about the structure of the court, and of course, it's the reason we have a court is because there's something called the Family Law Act, and it's the Family Law Act that creates the real mischief.
Mr. Lindsay says the Family Law Acts, the laws themselves, have been a political plaything for decades.
Politics brought it into existence under Lionel Murphy back in the 70s, and politics plays with it with every change of government. And so over that last 50 years, the Act, particularly the parenting provisions and the property division parts of the Family Law Act have changed and changed fairly distinctly with changes of government. And of course, mainly you'd have to say left-wing Labor governments.
Oh dear. Mr. Lindsay says that the Labor governments are more influenced by feminist doctrines.
More influenced as they are by feminist doctrines, particularly in the 80s and 90s, and there's been a recrudescence of that since about 2013 under the Gillard government and a particular Attorney General under the Gillard government. So judges do their best to cope with these things. They do their best to ignore them if they can, these ideological strictures that are baked into the Family Law Act. And they do the best they can. I've made many good friends in the court. I know that men and women sitting as judges in the court do their job conscientiously, but you've got to bear in mind the building, the superstructure is that Family Law Act, and it has contained and it's promoted great wickedness throughout Australian society now for 50 years.
Great wickedness. Wow. The great wickedness plays out primarily on fathers and men in the form of false sexual abuse allegations. Mr. Lindsay says there was a sudden tidal wave of sexual abuse allegations in the 1980s.
And the court was completely unprepared to deal with those kinds of matters, as was other institutions. And sexual abuse matters were there was an epidemic of them in the 1980s, and the mere making of an allegation could keep a father from seeing his children for some years while the matter wound its way through the system.
That's former Family Court Judge Stuart Lindsay speaking to Bettina Arndt this week. Mr. Lindsay says that the psychologists and doctors who gave evidence in the 1980s against accused men also had their own professional issues.
Psychologists and doctors who gave evidence and provided reports on those matters, the methodology was primitive back in the 1980s, and it took some very brave psychologists and psychiatrists and doctors to clean that up. Great damage was done in the meantime. So we recovered from that. We had a Liberal government, John Howard's, who eventually got around to making some structural changes to the Family Law Act, and we had that, just to try and give an overview of it, we had that period under Darryl Williams when the so-called Family Law Reform Bill was introduced, and then at the end of Howard's government, as I say, with the Gillard government, and then Rudd, and then Gillard, and then even under Turnbull, Abbott didn't do a lot of fiddling with it. We find more and more, Part 7 of the Act, that's the part dealing with parenting, we find these strange ideological invocations inserted into the Act to try to ensure that judges have the right or provide for the right outcome in accordance with the prevailing, invariably, feminist ideology.
Wow. He said the quiet part out loud. That's former Family Court Judge Stuart Lindsay bravely saying what needs to be said, what needs to be discussed, and what needs to be addressed and changed by our current crop of politicians. He makes it very clear in this interview that the problem is the feminist bureaucrats.
The personnel on the court might change and the Attorney Generals might change, but the bureaucracy, the Commonwealth bureaucracy, it continues on. And so it's really the bureaucrats who designed and assisted the politicians in writing and rewriting provisions of the Act to try and get specific outcomes. So, but it wasn't just feminism, of course. I can remember going to a conference in Sydney where we, 5 or 10 minutes in, the fellow I was sitting next to, we looked at each other and we were getting pure Gramscian communist evaluations of all of our social institutions. And of course we walked out. We weren't going to put up with that. But so it's it's not just the legislation. It's not just it's the way the court operates. It's that Commonwealth bureaucracy, and indeed it's gone further than that, Bettina. The rot's gone further. It's the law societies and even the bar associations in the various states who are enlisted to these ideological excursions.
That's former Family Court Judge Stuart Lindsay. He says the law societies and the bar associations used to be professional guilds and associations that were there to look after members. Now, he says, they've been co-opted into ideological fashions and trends. As an example of how the feminist ideology is playing out in court, Lindsay discusses the latest changes to the Family Law Act, new laws that were snuck through Parliament by Labor on the last sitting day last year, which give more of the marital assets to alleged victims of domestic violence. Mr. Lindsay says this sets judges an impossible task, requiring them to perform acts of political theatre, unquote, as they try to find evidence of the impact of domestic violence, scouring through decades of a marriage, trials needlessly extended, vastly more paperwork, racking up the billable hours for expensive lawyers. What Mr. Lindsay says will be, quote, a huge waste of resources, unquote. And for the families concerned, the pain, the distress will be needlessly intensified. And the kids get affected. That's the most important thing. Lindsay also shares strong views on other key failings of the court, like the failure to enforce parenting orders and the lack of penalties for false allegations. It's exceptionally rare for a former judge to be brave enough to speak out against the legal and government machine like this, so please don't underestimate the significance and importance of this particular interview by Bettina Arndt. Bettina presented this interview to a number of our mainstream media, including the conservative mainstream media, and none of them wanted to follow the story this week. It is a story when a former Supreme Court judge speaks out so strongly against the establishment. So something's not right in our media setting either. After you've watched tonight's episode of The Other Side, please be sure to head on over to Bettina's channel to check out this interview in full. Just search up Bettina Arndt, that's A-R-N-D-T, on YouTube. I want to tell you about a fantastic initiative that's happening out of Canberra right now. It's called the Awards for Men in Leadership. The awards are given out on International Men's Day, which is November 19. They're designed to combat the increasing denigration of masculinity in our culture and the widespread discrimination against males inside and outside the workplace. The goal is to lift the well-being of boys and men and facilitate healthy collaboration between men and women. The awards for men in leadership are designed to inspire men to make a bigger contribution to family and community and to elevate positive male role models. There's a $10,000 scholarship for studies and professional development, public recognition for the winners, and a year of mentorship and executive coaching for each recipient. It's targeted at young men and middle-aged guys who fought their way up from some other kind of disadvantage. This is the third year of the awards and it'll be the biggest yet. To find out more, just search up the Awards for Men in Leadership on Facebook.
You're watching The Other Side with Damien Coorey, Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed on the issues that matter most every second Friday. In between, don't miss The Other Side Unplugged, as Damien comments on current news and conducts in-depth interviews with the people who matter whenever the need arises. Simply subscribe for free on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and bell, so you'll be notified whenever we post anything. And to really stay in touch, check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month. This is The Other Side.
Well, do we have some good news for you this week, folks. The housing crisis, it's been solved. Yep. None other than Australia's most popular political YouTuber and Labor Party genius, Jordan-friendly Jordies Shanks, has solved everything. Well, his team of writers and leftist economists from The Guardian and the Australia Institute think they've solved everything anyway. And surprise, surprise, the answer is simple.
Here's a graph comparing prices from 1970 to 2017. You can see that the price of housing started leaving average earnings in the dust around the late 1990s. What was happening in the late 1990s? Oh, that's right. The Liberal government! Look, I'm sorry, I know you're sick of hearing it, but it is factually entirely the Liberal Party's fault.
Great. Now, I'd like to applaud the other side viewer who wrote in the last episode's comments section after we mentioned Jordan Shanks on our last show, friendly Jordies, WTF, why do I have to see him on this show? Let me be very clear. I'd like nothing more than to completely ignore this guy. He's a comedian that isn't funny, and as a political and economics commentator, he's got one shtick, and that's that everything is the fault of Conservatives and the Liberal Party, and a system of socialism controlled by him and 10 of his mates would, fix everything. But there's one tiny problem with ignoring this 19-year-old university student trapped in the body of a 35-year-old man with ageless skin and dazzling teeth. He is massively, massively influential. It's a problem all the geniuses in the Liberal Party would like to ignore and do ignore. In fact, they still think that the old mainstream media is the only media in town. So I'd hate to knock them out of their 20th century PR mindset. They've probably never even heard of friendly Jordies. But just to fill you in, guys, he's got 1.3 million, with an M, subscribers on YouTube. And within one day after the release of that 20-minute video solving the housing crisis, he'd clocked up 200,000 views. That's enough to make Sky News salivate with envy, and they're pretty huge on social media themselves. Now, let me get one thing out of the way right up front. Jordan is younger, better looking, and approximately 25 times more popular than me on YouTube. You could say I'm just jealous of his youth and success. But let me tell you right now, you're absolutely right. But the point is, we need to counter his nonsense because it works and it's influencing way too many people who vote, especially people under 35, even though he isn't under 35. One thing I do like about old friendly Jordies is that he slams the shallowness of the media and he slams the ABC for its insufferable cliche existence almost as much as we do. Like his takedown of this recent interview with Labor's Housing Minister Claire O'Neill on Triple J's nauseating hack program.
These policies, is it to bring down house prices? Is that what the government wants to do?
We want to bring house price growth into something sustainable. So we're not trying to bring down house prices, but we don't want to see some of the growth that we've seen in some parts of the country where you're getting double-digit increases in house prices year on year.
Why don't you want to be seeing house prices drop? Because if you're looking to get into the market, if you're a young person looking at what's ahead of you, you definitely want to see house prices come down.
Well, that may be the view of young people. It's not the view of our government. We want to see sustainable price growth. We want to see more houses come online. We want to see that rental vacancy rate go up a bit because that will relieve pressure on renters. And we certainly want to see more homeowners. And the government has taken action on all of those pieces this
Minister,
week.
if house prices don't come down, doesn't that mean that this system is stacked against young people, that it's just not going to work for them?
Sure. And Dave, we may have a difference of view about this. I have a strong view. Our government's, policies are not going to reduce house prices. We want house prices to grow sustainably.
Well, it's good to see the ABC's kept up with the quota of every white male in the building being a bearded ginger, because that man's certainly not going to get hired as a lifeguard.
Okay, he's right about that. He's also right about some hard truths.
We enjoy complaining about not having a house almost as much as we don't enjoy not having a house. But if you look at the OECD data, housing prices have been going up in basically every OECD nation. In fact, we have it better than a lot of the big boys. Australians pay around 23% of their income towards mortgage or rent, which is high, but it's less than the UK, USA, Canada, New Zealand, Chile, all the Scandinavian countries. Why is it important to put this all in perspective though? Well, it busts a bunch of myths that you'll hear endlessly on TikTok, like, what we need is a vacancy tax so there's more houses. A lot of these countries have more available housing stock than we do. They're still more expensive. It's because we don't have enough public housing. Plenty of these countries have more public and social housing than we do. Still more expensive.
So some of his diagnosis is excellent. I fully agree with that. It's just the solution is, well, it's exactly, and I mean exactly, the Labor Party's plan, which is big government, socialist, interventionist rubbish. It's like the Australia Institute wrote the policy, handed it straight to the Guardian and friendly Jordies for promotion, and bypassed the Labor Party officials altogether. Probably a good idea, to be honest. Anyway, I'll again applaud friendly Jordies for his very necessary and valid attacks on the Greens and Teal pretend independence. He also eviscerates their inane and highly politically opportunistic dumb ideas.
You can continue to believe the opportunistic lies of the independents and the Greens who are just telling you what you want to hear, which is that, yeah, we'll just magically make housing go down, even though there's literally not enough votes in the country to do it, and that'll wipe trillions of dollars of people's investments off the table, but we'll do it. And we'll do it because we'll never have to deliver on it. Or you can get behind the party that is actually trying to address the problem in the real world, who is clearly telling you Plan A isn't going to work. The Greens are just pretending. Christ, this is slimy.
$3 billion to be directly spent on social housing. That's 6 times what the government wanted to spend. And it wouldn't have happened without the Greens there to push them like hell to make it happen.
Honestly, if the Greens were a company, Adam Bean would be in jail for fraud. See this video here? They're lying about even that, but the fact that they go on and on about, yes, $3 billion, so much, and then have the gall to turn around to Labor dropping 10 times that, that's actually not good enough. In fact, not just pretend it sucks, block it.
I cannot wait until we have a Labor-Green coalition government. It's going to be so much fun, isn't it? Labor will have to listen to this clown, Max Chandler Mather, the Greens MP from the inner city Brisbane seat of Griffith.
Scrap negative gearing and capital gains so a first home buyer gets a chance.
Ooh, that winning combination of self-absorbed, ignorant and arrogant. I can see where their vote is concentrated in the inner city.
I've got to agree with him again. Geordie's Labor mates better work out a way to whip the Greens and the Teals into line quick smart, or we're going to have a hell ride for the next 3 years and nobody will be able to afford a roof over their heads. Jordan's undergraduate analysis of the problem is half right, but at the end of the day it sounds more like a Labor Party campaign ad than anything else. It's all the Liberal Party's fault, mainly John Howard's fault, for halving capital gains tax and allowing negative gearing. A deliberate conspiracy to divide Australia, Shanks says, because I'm not actually sure what that would achieve for the Liberal Party or anyone, frankly, but anyway, that's Labor's, friendly Jordies theory.
This was entirely their doing. They knew those tax loopholes would do this, that's one. They absolutely have no intention at all of doing anything about it, that's two. In fact, their intention is to make it worse. They want you to plunder your superannuation, which is your retirement fund, to further prop up the retirement fund pyramid scheme that the Liberals set up.
Yeah, because making things worse is a great way to get into and stay in government.
An entire generation of LARPing property investors. They want to keep that LARP going. Of course they do. The Liberals very deliberately set the system up in this way so that baby boomers bought into the pyramid scheme, where now their wealth and their retirement is locked into that very pyramid scheme.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's such a winning strategy to alienate everybody under 40. So no, mate, I don't think that's the Liberal Party's strategy for winning somehow. It's a conspiracy theory worthy of a trophy in the shape of a green lizard alien. Maybe we could get one of those for you. Jordies continues to promote Labor's policies of government interventions, all centrally controlled, of course. Policies that at least are honest left-wing policies, I'll give him that, unlike the nonsense that we get from the Teals and Greens. But he heavily downplays the two most obvious and biggest causes of the housing crises that don't fit his ideological agenda: immigration and the supply shortage, both caused by too much government intervention. It's Economics 101 that if there isn't enough of a thing that lots of people want, its price will go up. It's also Economics 101 that if the government leaves a market alone and regulates it as lightly as possible, only to deter bad actors and bad incentives when they absolutely have to, that the market will work out the most efficient way of meeting demand at an affordable price very quickly indeed. For example, one thing that would really help the housing supply problem is if small developers were able to make projects actually affordable again. And it'd be great if councils didn't front-load infrastructure charges for things like roads, water, sewerage and electricity, and then let the utilities companies charge like they paid for the infrastructure themselves later. That's double dipping. Loosening up on the labour costs, green tape, red tape, and taxes on materials, they all might help a lot too. Let people build. Support prosperity, support property developers, instead of treating them like the most evil people on the planet. Have you noticed that we don't have enough property developers actually wanting to build anything right now? That's because it's too damn expensive and too risky. And maybe not letting in the entire population of Darwin and Canberra every year might help slow the demand down a little bit. But Jordies won't discuss immigration. He puts it in as one little aspect and supplies one little aspect. No, he won't. He mocks anyone who raises the actual immigration problem as some sort of stereotypical dumb, racist, deplorable. And he sure as heck won't support any policy that might mean someone who wants to actually invest and develop and do something and create and build something gets a leg up, because then they might make a profit. Oh no. They might grow their business. Oh dear, we can't have that. And they might be able to employ more people and build more stuff and actually be productive. Blech, rich people, yuck. That'd be just horrible for Labor and the unions. You may have noticed if you've been overseas on holiday recently that you can log into your streaming services like Netflix or Prime in other countries, but the shows they offer are different and sometimes even better. You're paying good money for those subscription services. Why can't you watch? Well, with a virtual private network or VPN, you can log in from home here in Australia with an internet address from anywhere in the world, and big corporations and big government can't see where you are. Now, to be clear, criminals can still be actively found with police warrants, of course, but the average honest citizen will have their location protected from prying eyes of corporate marketers and government bureaucrats. If you sign up now with private internet access, we think they are the best VPN service out there. That's private internet access. As a viewer of The Other Side, you can get 83% off the price of your subscription and get online for less than $3 a month. Check it out right now. Go to piavpn.com/otherside. That's piavpn.com/otherside. It's a great service and a rock bottom price, and you're helping keep the other side going and growing. Just a quick reminder that yes, our main show is now fortnightly, but there will be a show next Friday night, April 11, because there won't be a show the following Friday, April 18, because it's Good Friday and the Easter holiday weekend. Remember too that our new show, The Other Side Unplugged, drops often on the Friday nights that we don't have a main show, so there's still something to watch on Friday nights all the time. But it can drop at any time. We do The Other Side Unplugged whenever we like. That's the whole idea of it. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell on YouTube so you never miss a thing. And even better still, please sign up at our website at othersidetv.com.au and we will send you emails when we post stuff, if you want. So here's some actual grown-up facts about the causes of high housing prices in Australia. A little boring, but we can manage it. We've got brains. The people who watch this show have brains. You don't need to be spoken to like friendly Jordies speaks to his audience. According to research by both the Reserve Bank and the Australian Institute for Progress, around 70% of the rise in house prices is due to the decrease in interest rates we've had in recent years. That's increased demand versus the available supply. So prices go up. The Howard government tax policy changes no doubt affected house prices a bit, but empirical evidence suggests that the impact on property prices of both negative gearing and the capital gains tax concession was only around 2%, according to the Grattan Institute, and around 4 to 5% at the most, according to other economists that we spoke to. If lower capital gains tax and negative gearing were the factors that were driving up prices, then Australia would have had a housing affordability problem in the 1960s and 70s. But it didn't. Jean Tunney from Adept Economics says the biggest reason for the increase since 2000 is the imposition of character housing rules across large parts of our capital cities and less greenfield land available for development, partly because infrastructure charges increased really sharply. All the red and green tape also matters a lot. The Housing Institute of Australia commissioned research which showed that taxes in Sydney can add a whopping $576,000 to the price of an average home. House prices have risen at an alarming rate for the past 25 years because demand has increased faster than supply as governments increasingly make new home building expensive through taxes, fees and charges, they say. Politicians continue to blame foreigners, investors, and then foreign investors for the housing shortage rather than to make policy changes to reduce tax and increase supply. Only half the cost of a new house and land package is the cost of the house and land. Let that sink in. The other half are costs imposed by governments. Another factor you won't hear Labor and the left mention is the energy transition and the splurging on infrastructure occurring at a national and state level. That is chewing up more resources than the economy actually has. It means construction costs for everything go up, including private housing. There's also the issue of gold plating of construction standards, having standards that are, just crazy. It's one thing to have good standards, to have safety. We need that, right? But things are getting ridiculous. The new National Building Code alone is estimated to add something like $50,000 to the price of a two-story house, some of which is to pay to make all the houses wheelchair accessible, which sounds lovely, but fewer than 1% of the population actually uses wheelchairs, and so why should 100% of the population, especially new young home buyers, have to pay that $50,000? Now, normally the interest rate increase that we've had would have taken the top off asset prices and brought housing prices down or just stabilised a bit. But when you've got the population of 2 Tasmanias arriving in the last 2 years, fueling demand, that's not going to happen. By the way, negative gearing, it was removed in the 1980s by Paul Keating, and with the exception of Sydney, it had negligible impact on pricing. So guess who brought it back? Bob Hawke. Punishing investors and developers is not going to help the supply problem. Who knew? Everybody. Anyway, while we're talking economics, the Reserve Bank, as you're probably well aware by now, held rates steady this week. There won't be another rates meeting until after the election, so that's it for now. But the fact that we just had one cut and then no more makes it pretty clear that a series of rate cuts probably isn't happening really as fast as economists were saying and hoping it might. And although the Reserve Bank governor was being very politically careful not to show any bias in the news conference, it's clear the bank doesn't think inflation is truly under control and that government spending is still off the charts. The budget and the budget reply, I'm afraid, just demonstrated an unwillingness by our political class to cut the out-of-control government spending, with deficits baked in until the mid-2030s. And maybe worse still, nobody's got a strong debt reduction strategy either, as our borrowings at federal and state level creep above $1.5 trillion. Here's how the ABC reported the rate announcement on Tuesday.
After the Reserve Bank left the cash rate on hold as expected at 4.1%.
We have made good progress on bringing inflation down and keeping unemployment low. This is a good position for the economy to be in as we approach a period of uncertainty. But we have to be careful not to get ahead of ourselves. Inflation pressures remain and cost of living pressures are still very real for many Australians.
So forget the US tariff problem. They're not going to directly hit Australia too hard, nor will they change the Reserve Bank's view on rates, frankly. The chance of a cut in May after the election has fallen a bit, but it's still around 70% of analysts who think that another cut will come then. I sit a little bit in the other 30%. You see, Australia has a productivity problem, and most experts say that there's not much chance that things are going to improve anytime soon. Australia's multi-factor productivity number, that's the statistic that economists like to use as the main measure of productivity. It includes the impact of both labour and capital investment on productivity. That's risen by only 0.1% in the past 2 years. That's the dark blue line there on the chart. That's well below the 20-year average. In fact, labour productivity alone, the light blue line there, hasn't improved at all in more than 5 years. On top of all that, business investment is expected to be very weak until late 2025, which could further hinder productivity. If it's going to improve, there's going to be a need for government to have some vision and focus on supporting innovation and business. Also, we'll need to improve the skills of the workforce through better education and training. But there's also an attitude problem around work in this country that we need to talk about. Just try actually starting a small business and employing someone, and you'll get the picture very fast. Productivity is a key determinant of economic growth and living standards. And we cannot have wages growth unless we have productivity growth. Because if we put wages up without getting productivity up too, then we just increase the cost of everything that's already being produced, and that equals inflation. And without inflation under control, that means higher interest rates, etc., round and round we go. And you know where the biggest drain on productivity sits in this country? It sits with Labor's two favourite groups, unions and bureaucrats. I'm not talking about the public servants at the front lines, not the nurses, the police and the teachers who are actually teaching. The bureaucrats, the people who make the rules in public service offices that make the people on the front line even less productive. The people whose own job productivity is next to zero and who drive down the productivity of the people on the front lines with their stupid rules and regulations that make doing the job as a nurse or teacher or police officer harder. We need to gut the public service officers. Now, Peter Dutton said in his budget reply speech that he will do a little culling.
We'll reverse Labor's increase of 41,000 Canberra public servants because it will save about $7 billion a year. That's money that we can provide back to the Australian people in frontline services. And the growth rate of public servants under this government in Canberra is about 3 times the rate it was under the Rudd-Gillard government.
Australia has 2.5 million people on the public payroll. That's almost 1 in 10 of us and 1 in 6 of us who actually make up the workforce of 15 million. That's a lot. Dutton's cuts would be a drop in the ocean. But even his modest plan not to increase the size of the bloated bureaucracy is causing the Labor lovies to go into full meltdown. See, I think the big problem is our national psyche right now. Telling Australians they've got to tighten their belts or be more productive or justify their paycheck, as real leaders used to do in the days of Fraser and Hawke, is no longer acceptable among politicians who are desperately in need of love to win office. It's also unacceptable to media outlets who desperately need to win audiences. So nobody is going to tell the public that they have to be more productive or work harder and smarter, or that inefficient, wasteful jobs have to be cut, or wages can't go up until we get more productivity. It's a complete no-no in this day and age to speak any of those things. But they're true. And we won't see inflation under control or interest rates coming down significantly until we face the facts. Our government spending is out of control. We're too dependent on government services and handouts, and until that's fixed, interest rates are not coming down. So we better start rewarding the politicians and the media commentators who have the guts to deliver us the bad news, and stop rewarding the ones who keep pretending everything is fine so they can hang on to their audiences and voters. Are we mature enough as a nation and a people to handle that? That's the real question. I want to tell you about a fantastic initiative that's happening out of Canberra right now. It's called the Awards for Men in Leadership. The awards are given out on International Men's Day, which is November 19. They're designed to combat the increasing denigration of masculinity in our culture and the widespread discrimination against males inside and outside the workplace. The goal is to lift the well-being of boys and men and facilitate healthy collaboration between men and women. The awards for men in leadership are designed to inspire men to make a bigger contribution to family and community and to elevate positive male role models. There's a $10,000 scholarship for studies and professional development, public recognition for the winners, and a year of mentorship and executive coaching for each recipient. It's targeted at young men and middle-aged guys who fought their way up from some other kind of disadvantage. This is the 3rd year of the awards and it'll be the biggest yet. To find out more, just search up the Awards for Men in Leadership on Facebook. So this week we've criticised all the Conservative minor parties. We've criticised the Teals and the Greens. We've criticised the Liberal Party. We've criticised the Labor Party enormously. We've criticised all the general public, everybody that's working in the public sector. Yeah, I think pretty much we should have absolutely no followers and viewers left by next week. So it's been great. No, I'm just kidding. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes you just got to tell the truth, and that's what we try to do here. So we don't want to criticise everybody. Don't want to be depressing. There's optimism. We live in a great country. The sun's shining. The surf is great, and it's a beautiful place. And I think we can just do better running it if we all pull together and have these discussions and debates, and aren't afraid to criticise things, and aren't afraid to say maybe we need to pull in our belts a little bit sometimes. But that is all we have for this episode of The Other Side, your analysis of the best news and commentary without the woke. Our main show is now fortnightly, but don't forget we will have a show next Friday night, April 11. Episode 407 will be next Friday, April 11, because we won't be having a show the following Friday, April 18, because it's Good Friday, and we respect Good Friday around here. So we will catch you again next Friday, April 11th. So do remember to subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss any content. It's all free. It's free to subscribe on YouTube. It's free to sign up on our website, which I think is really important, which is othersidetv.com.au, othersidetv.com.au. And most importantly, please remember to tell your friends about the show. If you like what we're doing, that's the best way that you can help us. If you want to support us financially, we do need it. I'm not going to joke about that. There isn't a lot of financial support out there for a show like this. So please jump onto our new website, othersidetv.com.au, sign up to the exclusive side. You can do that for $5, $10 or $20 roughly a month, or less than $5 a month if you want to. Just sign up so that we can keep in touch. I'm Damien Curry. Bye for now.
The Other Side with Damien Curry is Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed on the issues that matter most every second Friday. In between, don't miss The Other Side Unplugged, as Damien comments on current news and conducts in-depth interviews with the people who matter whenever the need arises. Simply subscribe for free on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and bell so you'll be notified whenever we post anything. And to really stay in touch, check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.